speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all, and thank you for joining us from all around the globe for this fifth event in a series of regional conversations on building back better that ESCAP is organizing. My name is Srinivas Tata. I'm the Director of the Social Development Division here in ESCAP, and I am privileged to be your moderator today to facilitate this regional conversation, which is called Social Protection, a right for all or a privilege for a few. Today's event, which is jointly organized with our colleagues in the ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, is essentially going to be in two parts. We're going to start with the launch of the flagship publication, The Social Outlook for Asia and the Pacific, which is the first ever regional report on social protection, which has been produced jointly by ESCAP and the ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. As part of the second segment of the event, after the launch, we will continue with a high-level panel discussion on social protection, and the expected duration of this event will be about 2 hours. Before we start, I would like to kindly ask our participants in the MS Teams platform to turn your video to off and to mute your microphones so that we don't have a disruption. I would then like to ask our distinguished speakers for each part of our event to keep your video on and your microphone off when you're not speaking, and switch it to on when you're asked to speak. So, for the launch of the report, I have the great pleasure of welcoming Ibu Armida Salcia Alizjabana, Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and the convener of the regional conversation series on building back better, and Mr. Guy Ryder, the Director General from the International Labour Organization, who is joining us from Geneva. We also have present here Ms. Chihoko Asada Miyazawa, the Regional Director of the ILO Asia Pacific Regional Office. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Ibu Armida Alizjabana for her opening remarks. Ibu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Srinivas. Excellencies, Mr. Guy Ryder, Director General of ILO, distinguished speakers, colleagues, and friends, warm welcome to the fifth event of our regional conversation series on building back better. Today's regional conversation is about a right for all or a privilege for a few, and launch of the social outlook for Asia and the Pacific. We are organizing this event jointly by ESCAP and ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. This is a very important and urgent topic in these extraordinary times. I'm particularly delighted to share the virtual stage with Mr. Guy Ryder, Director General of International Labour Organization, and Ms. Chihoko Asada Miyakawa, ILO's Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. I appreciate the participation of member states, UN family, and experts for sharing their insights and best practices today. On COVID-19 and the importance of social protection. To counter the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries have strengthened existing social protection schemes and sometimes introduced new and ad hoc measures. In times of crisis, social protection is our society's primary line of defense. Yet, ESCAP research shows that across the region, excluding health, many countries in the region spend less than 2% of GDP on social protection. This low level of investment stands in contrast to the global average of almost 11%. Only a handful of countries have comprehensive social protection systems in our region. Maternity, unemployment, sickness, and disability benefits are the preserve of a minority of workers in the formal economy, leaving about 70% of workers locked out of contributory schemes. Lower labor force participation among women accentuates gaps in social protection coverage. Our analysis also shows that the proportion of households living in poverty would fall by up to 18%, or 18 percentage points if governments were to offer social protection to their population. During this unfolding health and economic crisis due to COVID pandemic, evidence shows that well-managed social protection systems have been far better equipped to respond to the unexpected. They are more effective in shielding the most vulnerable population groups and stabilizing our economies and societies. By establishing basic non-contributory schemes for children, older persons, and persons with disabilities, government would need between 2 and 6% of GDP. It is a significant financing requirement, but still fiscally affordable with large socio-economic benefits. And let me now highlight 3 key reasons for the lack of access to social protection scheme. The first one is informality. About 2/3 of the labor force in Asia and the Pacific are informal workers. We need to connect the 2 agendas, which is expansion of social protection and tackling of informality, to be able to fill the vast gaps. Second is on the inefficiency. Delivering social protection to vulnerable population is a challenge. A robust civil registration system is needed to correctly include people and families in social protection administration systems. We need advocate for universal schemes. And third is the lack of political commitment. Strengthening institutional architecture and sustainable financing modalities are not enough in the region. There is a need to convince policymakers to urgently focus on social protection for all. And we see also emerging trends. Rapid population aging is placing unprecedented challenges both on societies, older persons, and those working. Technological innovation is also reshaping labor markets and creating a set of opportunities and challenges. Natural disasters are aggravated by climate change and becoming more frequent and also more destructive. In view of this, today's conversation aims to address the following selected issues faced by many leaders, policymakers, and innovators alike. First question, hopefully viewers, also the panelists would be able to provide or shed lights on the following question. First is, what would be the impact on societies if countries were to expand social protection coverage? Second question is, what can governments do to build inclusive, effective, and sustainable social protection systems to prepare their countries for many of the ongoing and emerging challenges? Third question is, how can countries in the region learn from each other, and what role can the UN system play in this regard? At the 6th Committee on Social Development of ESCAP, which will take place next week, we also hope to see the adoption of an action plan to strengthen regional cooperation on social protection. Before closing, I wish to express my sincerest appreciation to our colleagues in ILO. The Social Outlook for Asia and Pacific report would not have been possible without the expertise, competence, and commitment of ILO colleagues. I'm very much looking forward to your deliberation, reflections, and thoughts on these issues that we can work and collaborate further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Armida, for providing a succinct overview of the report's key findings and also for your constant support for our work on social protection. Excellencies, the International Labour Organization is at the forefront of efforts to expand social protection for all. I have the great honor to pass the floor to Mr. Guy Ryder, Director General, International Labour Organization, who is joining us from Geneva. Mr. Ryder, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Madam Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Madam Regional Director of the ILO for Asia Pacific Region, Ministers, Excellencies, dear participants. It's really a great pleasure to join this regional conversation on how we can build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. We're delighted to be working in close partnership with our friends from ESCAP, and we're delighted to have this conversation in such distinguished company, and a special greeting on my part to my old friend and colleague, Michael Sichon. Today, we're launching an important report that is, I think, absolutely and centrally relevant to this goal of building back better, the report on social protection for the Asia-Pacific region, which the Executive Secretary has just introduced to you. I think that we all understand that social protection, more than anything else, is what can prevent the current global health emergency and its dramatic economic and social consequences becoming a fully fledged humanitarian crisis. ESCAP and the ILO have a common view on the critical importance of social protection, and the subject is currently right in the spotlight, centrally so, of policy making, because of how human vulnerability has been so cruelly exposed by the pandemic. We think that making good the social protection deficits which are now so manifest is important not only for the recovery process, but also for building solid foundations for the future. And since the ILO was set up, and it's 100 years ago now, we at the ILO have placed the right to social protection at the heart of our mission for the promotion of social justice. And 100 years later, last year, the ILO's member states met to discuss the future of work at our centenary International Labour Conference. And there was general agreement that social protection systems would be essential for a future of work that focused on people above all else. Since then, of course, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 crisis has hit and our world has changed beyond recognition. And it's against this background that the report is being published today. And in the context of the damage caused by the pandemic, I think we can all agree that its findings are even more dramatically relevant than ever before. More than half the people in the region still have no social protection. Only a minority have anything approaching comprehensive protection. And for almost all of those who are working in the informal sector, social protection remains a distant dream. Now, on a more encouraging note, there are countries which have made important progress in extending social protection coverage. I can cite the examples, of course, of China, of Thailand, and Timor-Leste. And these are those who have expanded pension and health protection. But unfortunately, we have not seen the same progress with, for example, maternity protection, employment injury and employment insurance, or child and family benefits. And the vast majority of people in the region still lack all of these. Ladies and gentlemen, if we've learned anything from the COVID-19 crisis, it is surely this, that we are only as safe as the most vulnerable amongst us. At the same time, the pandemic has highlighted the vulnerable, precarious situation of so many working women and men. That is particularly so for those in the informal economy, whose problems all too frequently seem to fall beyond the range of vision of policymakers. And yes, there is much talk of building back better and creating a more equitable, a more sustainable future. And if we're serious about this, and I trust that we all are, we simply must prioritize the task of delivering social protection for all. We must ensure that no one is left behind. This is the objective which underwrites everything in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the deadline for which, as we are all aware, is now just 10 years away. So we need to work together, we need to do more, we need to do better, and we need to go more quickly. And that means ensuring not only that more people are covered by social protection, the scope of their protection must be increased, and the level of benefits provided has to be sufficient to do what they are intended for. And turning back in conclusion to the report that we are launching today, I think you'll find within it a lot of very important information, important recommendations that can help us to build stronger social protection systems. And like my colleague, the Executive Secretary, I'm going to finish by highlighting 3 points, not exactly the same points, but entirely compatible. Firstly, we simply have to stop describing and thinking of social protection as purely a cost, and often as one that countries believe they cannot afford. Instead, we have to start to recognize that social protection truly is an investment that can support economic development, protect jobs, and enhance productivity, unlocking future prosperity. Secondly, we have to fulfill the pledge of leaving nobody behind by investing in truly universal social protection systems. And thirdly, we need to focus on the most vulnerable workers and their families, pay special attention to those in the informal economy, and create systems that finally can and do reach them. Ladies and gentlemen, the countries of the Asia-Pacific region have a track record of transforming crises into something positive. We saw that back in 1997, we saw it again in 2008. And in each case, that included several countries taking the opportunity to significantly extend their social protection systems. And if we are going to seize the opportunity now, countries must be serious about making necessary financial commitments. Yes, this will cost, but I believe that without adequate investment in public social protection systems, the social and economic progress of the region, which it has made in recent decades, will be at risk. Is it a steep hill to climb? Yes, but it can be climbed, and it must be. And I think that we can be inspired by the many success stories that have come from different countries in the region, so that we can forge the future that we want to see and that we have a responsibility to construct. Many hundreds of millions of people throughout the region, and I would apply that to other regions as well, are relying upon this. Social protection is a human right, and we should not rest until this right has become a reality for everyone. Many thanks.
I thank Mr. Ryder for your extremely insightful remarks and reminding us of the urgency to act on expanding social protection for all in our region, and above all, leaving no one behind. I would like to now invite everyone to watch a short video that highlights the key findings of the report, which is being referred to, The Protection We Want, Social Outlook for Asia and the Pacific. Please watch this video.
Social protection is first and foremost a human right. Anchored in human rights instruments, social protection schemes provide cash or in-kind support for people facing social and economic risks. Social protection is also society's immune system. The COVID-19 crisis has again demonstrated how a well-functioning social protection system protects individuals and economies, acting as a stabilizer in times of crisis. The pandemic is aggravating existing underlying ills. The region's gains in economic growth over the past few decades have not translated into equivalent gains in the population's well-being. Along with the pandemic, several overlapping global trends are at work: population aging, migration, urbanization, technological progress, disasters, and climate change. Social protection schemes are key to adapting to these disruptions. Well-resourced social protection systems built over time can help respond to the unexpected and shield the most vulnerable. But critical gaps in social protection are undermining this immune system. Despite their rapid socio-economic ascent, most countries in the region have weak social protection systems filled with gaps. 55% have no social protection coverage at all. Poverty-targeted schemes fail to reach the poorest families. Benefits often only reach workers with a formal job. The majority of the population are covered for old age, but pension benefits are low. Over 25% of the population does not have any health care protection. Why do these gaps in the provision of social protection schemes exist? There is significant underinvestment in social protection programs. On average, public spending on social protection in the region, excluding health, is 7% of GDP, which is lower than the global average of 11%. Other factors include informality and weak administrative structures. Investment in a basic social protection package would have immediate impact on poverty, inequality, and purchasing power. Regional simulations of recipient households show poverty would drop by up to 18 percentage points. Recipient households would also see a boost in their purchasing power between 7 and 24%. This investment is within reach for most countries. Social protection requires a significant but affordable increase in public social protection expenditure. Estimations range from 2 to 6.1% of GDP. In addition to investing more in social protection, governments need to embed social protection in the core of national economic and social development agendas and allocate more resources. Build universal social protection systems. Achieve this with a mix of contributory and non-contributory benefit schemes. In building universal protection systems, leave no one behind. Make efforts to include migrants and forcibly displaced individuals and families, ethnic minorities, and those living in urban informal settlements or in remote areas. Provide social protection to women throughout their lives. Accelerate efforts to create formal jobs and expand social protection to informal workers. Ensure greater coherence and integration of social protection to better cover the missing middle. Improve efficiency and effectiveness through emerging technologies. Tailor responses to the context. Specific actions are required at the national level, depending on the level of coverage of existing schemes and the broader socio-economic context. There is potential for us all to steer emerging trends towards a socio-economically stronger region and achieve the ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030.
Sure, all of us enjoyed this highly informative video because we've tried to capture the key findings and recommendations in a nutshell. I now have the honor to request the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Ibu Armida, along with the ILO Regional Director for Asia Pacific, Ms. Chihoko Asada Miyazawa, to move to the front of the podium and stand next to the roll-up of the cover of the report. We will take a photograph of both of them next to the roll-up to symbolically mark the launch of the report, The Protection We Want, Social Outlook for Asia and the Pacific. Is being provided on your screen. And so you can download it at any time by accessing it on the ESCAP website. We are now ready to move to the second segment of this regional conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, as the report shows, and as we learned from the opening statements made by the distinguished speakers, the urgency of extending social protection to all is clear and not disputed. The ongoing pandemic has also shown that governments are willing to do so. Still, social protection coverage remains low in most countries in the region. Even when schemes exist, benefit levels are often insufficient to cover women's basic needs. So how do we remedy the situation and how do we build back better? To help us answer some of these daunting questions, we will be moving into our panel discussion where we'll be welcoming 6 exceptional panelists to discuss why we are seeing such insufficient investment in people and how we could use the lessons learned from COVID-19 to build back better. I will be introducing each of the distinguished panelists before I ask them the questions. We propose to have 2 rounds of discussions among the panelists, and once the 2 rounds are over, we will open up the floor for questions and comments from the floor. I would like to ask our distinguished speakers to please ensure that your video is turned on and your microphone off when you're not speaking, and please switch it on from and unmute yourself when the question is addressed to you. I now have the pleasure of addressing the first question of the panel discussion to Her Excellency Mereseni Vuniwaqa, who is the Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation in the government of Fiji. Prior to her political career, Ms. Vuniwaqa was a civil servant and a lawyer in the Attorney General's chambers. She has served as the Minister of Land and Mineral Resources for 2 years prior to her current post. Ms. Vuniwaqa, my question to you is that the Pacific Islands differ widely in terms of the development of the social protection systems, and Fiji is an example of a country with better overall coverage. Could you brief us a little bit about the social pension scheme that Fiji has introduced? And also from your experience as a senior minister in your government and as a tireless advocate for strengthening social protection, what have been the main challenges for expanding social protection for all that you have faced in the context of your country? Ms. Vuniwaqa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Tata. The Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Fiji's social protection system offers a few programs under it. I'll very briefly discuss the targeted beneficiaries of these programs. The first one, the Poverty Benefit Scheme, is targeted at the poorest of the poor. It's an assistance that is targeted at families that do not have a source of income and belong in the poverty bracket. Then we have a care and protection allowance. This is targeted at children that come from single-parented families with no source of income, children who are of school-going age, but with no source of income from their single parents. We have a social pension scheme, which is targeted at Fijians over 65 years of age and have no other form of social protection. The fourth one, the disability allowance, this is something that was that started in 2017 in accordance with Fiji ratifying the Convention on the Rights of Persons Living with Disabilities. Disability allowance targeted at persons living with disabilities in Fiji. Then we have two collateral social protection assistance that is given for pregnant women, the expanded food voucher for pregnant mothers. It's a food voucher that is given to women living in rural areas to inspire them, to incentivize them to turn up to health centers for clinics and to assist in the nutrition of the unborn child. We also have transportation concessions for those 60 years and over and those living with disabilities. This, of course, does not include the bus fare assistance that's given to children that fall within a certain income bracket. Dr. Tata, in a nutshell, those are the programs that we have under our social protection net. You asked also about the challenges, the main challenges that we face in relation to social protection in Fiji. I think it's important to give a bit of background to this. Fiji's social protection system is rooted in our constitution. Our constitution provides for the right for Fijians to access social protection, both the contributory scheme and also non-contributory scheme where it's unaffordable for Fijians. And apart from that, there's a act that provides for the rights of persons disabilities that again promises the accessibility of social protection for those living with disabilities. So if for those who may not know much about Fiji, we are 300 islands. And out of these 300 islands, 110 of them, around 110 are inhabited. So one of the hugest challenges we have in rolling out social protection is accessibility to the service that we provide. That, of course, is it goes along with communication, the ability to communicate with our citizens, the availability of this particular service within the government mechanism. And how do we address this particular challenge? We have a program that is one of the hallmarks of service delivery in the Fijian government. It's called the REACH program. It's basically an office that brings in key stakeholders, one of them being the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. And what they do, they go out to those areas where people may find it difficult to access services, government services. So because of the layout, our geographical layout, this particular team, the REACH program, they go out to hard to reach places, maritime and rural areas, going out to the islands, providing services like social protection to Fijians that may have accessibility issues. One of the other challenges that we have here in the Pacific is climate change. In the midst of COVID, we were struck by a Category 5 cyclone, Cyclone Harold. And in the span of 4 years, we've been struck now by 2 Category 5 cyclones, Cyclone Winston in 2016. 2016, Cyclone Harold this year. So what the social protection platform has been able to provide in the context of these natural disasters is to provide a mechanism, an existing mechanism that has been tested over time. It's provided a mechanism for government and donors alike to be able to tap into and assist those who have been particularly affected by not only COVID, also by the tropical cyclones. In practicality, for example, the government of Australia stepped forward to assist Fiji during the COVID crisis, assisting social welfare beneficiaries with top-ups over 2 months. And in the context of Tropical Cyclone Harold, the World Food Programme stepped forward and used the social protection mechanism to assist those who have been affected by Tropical Cyclone Harold. So that, Dr. Tata, because of the social protection mechanism, is already entrenched within the government system on an IT platform. It is quite possible, it's very possible to identify our beneficiaries and their locality. Of course, these beneficiaries move from area to area without informing us sometimes, and that becomes a challenge in itself. But apart from accessibility and climate change, what the report that has just been launched talks about the missing middle. I believe that's also a challenge that's faced by a lot of governments. The missing middle, our Fijians that work in the informal sector and may not be eligible for social protection, non-contributory scheme, but because of the nature of their work, are also not able to access the contributory scheme under superannuation. So in a nutshell, a few challenges that we face. Of course, there are lots of other challenges, one of them being, which I think is critical in any effective social protection scheme, the ability to monitor and continuously evaluate the system to ensure that those who are being targeted for social protection, their needs are actually being met by the social protection scheme in place. So that, Dr. Tata, the challenges that we have, and in summary, the social protection network that we have here in Fiji. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I think you've covered it. You've covered in a nutshell, you've covered the schemes and also the challenges and the way you're addressing them very well, and which will nicely segue into our questions in the second round. But now I have the pleasure of moving on to our next panelist, distinguished panelist. Initially, Her Excellency Ms. Aida Fauziya, the Minister of Manpower in Malaysia, was scheduled to participate, but she has due to regret, she had to regret at the last minute. And we are very grateful that she has nominated the Director General on Industrial Relations and Workers' Social Security, Ibu Hayani Rumondan, to speak on her behalf. Ibu Hayani, my question to you is that Indonesia has a range of non-contributory poverty-targeted social protection programs for poor households and for persons with disabilities. Like in many other countries in Asia Pacific, contributory schemes are not as well developed. It is only employees with higher incomes that contribute to social protection, and non-contributory schemes cover mostly the poorer household. So how are those in the middle, as was referred to by the minister from Fiji, often found in the informal sector covered? We know that the Indonesian government is making efforts to extend the contributory scheme for self-employed further. So can you share a little bit about your experience, about progress and the challenges and the achievements that you've made so far? Ibu Hayani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Distinguished excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all the panelists. The Indonesia government strives to protect all levels of society. Social protections that have we done not only for the workers, but also for the whole society or for the public. Regarding participations or membership in the Social Security Program, the workers at BPJS Ketenagakerjaan are categorized into four, such as workers who receive wages or non-wages workers, workers in construction services, and migrant workers. In accordance with the regulations of the Minister of Manpower, number 1 in the year of 2016, regarding procedures for implementing work accidents security program, death security, and old age security programs for participants who do not receive wages. What mean by participants in who do not receive wages as individuals who implement business activities independently to earn income. Workers for non-wage earners should participate in the two BPJS Ketenagakerjaan programs, such as one, for work accident program, and second, death security programs. Non-wage workers, or what you call it as self-employed, may also voluntarily join the old age security program. Workers who do not receive wages are required to register their participation or membership at BPJS Ketenagakerjaan individually or collectively through certain institutions or groups. What we call it in Indonesia as a wadah. The media could be a professional organization or something which is able to make a cooperation agreement with the local BPJS Ketenagakerjaan branch office. The trend of membership or the trend of participation data for non-wages workers in the Social Security Program, workforce at BPJS Ketenagakerjaan, I can show you for the data from year 2006 to 2019, which shows actually a significant increase. In 2016, the membership of non-wage workers was 1.38 million. Then for in 2019, there is a significant increase. Is about 100% memberships. Can be to be 2.7 million membership. But unfortunately, because of a pandemic, COVID-19, until July 2020, and the membership of non-wages workers decreased for 1.9, and we still waiting for the new data but I think this is a not significant difference because of the pandemic COVID-19. So the decreasing number of membership for non-wages workers. So we see that the significant increase from 2016 and to 2019. The government continues its effort in order to increase the participation of non-wage workers in the workforce social security program. But we believe that there are some problems because you see that the income which is have by the non-wage workers is not really enough to pay for the contribution. But the government also together with BPJS Ketenagakerjaan have many efforts. For example, we do raising awareness and socializations for the whole of the countries by strengthening the commitment of regional government. And also, it's not just a regional government, but we ask for community or for people to include BPJS target in the program. I mean that we ask what we call it as a WADA or community to have a people who categorize as self-employed or categorized as non-wage earners can contribute to be a membership of BPJS Ketenagakerjaan. We know that this is not easy since the whole of the countries also need some program for helping the people to do something that there is also the regional effort to add some what we call it is like some money for the people to get membership of the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan. Another effort is to ask participation from the community, like we call it is PRISAI, to expand the number of social security participation. There is a success story for this, since the PRISAI or the community who helped the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan to get a new memberships, they are also people. So this is a success story. That's why the increasing number of the membership, especially from 2018 to 2019, is a very significant the increase of membership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think this is already effective to achieve the target of social security participation. Thank you for this session.
No, thank you very much. I think you've covered your efforts to cover the informal sector very comprehensively, and you've also illustrated some of the challenges. So we will be able to build on that maybe during the second round. And I thank you for your really informative response. Our next panelist is Dr. Sania Nishtar. Dr. Sania Nishtar is the Special Assistant of the Pakistan's Prime Minister. She is the rank of a federal minister in charge of poverty alleviation and social safety for the government of Pakistan. She is the founder of ASAS, the Pakistan's flagship social protection program, and leads its implementation. Dr. Nishtar also chairs the Benazir Income Support Program and the Government of Pakistan's Council on Poverty Alleviation. Dr. Nishtar, if you're online, if you can hear me, I would like to ask you your first question. We have heard from the previous speakers about the low rate of investment in social protection in the region and the need for comprehensive social protection systems. You're leading the ASAS program in Pakistan. What is the plan of the government of Pakistan to move towards comprehensive social protection? And what are the challenges that you face in Pakistan in moving towards comprehensive social protection? We'd be very delighted if you could share your experience. Ms. Nishtar, Dr. Nishtar, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this prestigious and important conversation. Let me at the outset congratulate you on the launch of a landmark report, which is both timely, much needed, and fits very well in the space where policymaking in the social protection arena is being considered very seriously by many different countries. Your question related to the efforts of my government to prioritize social protection and the ESAS program in particular. So let me right at the very outset tell you that ESAS in our local language, Urdu, means compassion. When the government came into power about 2 years ago, the Prime Minister announced right at the very outset, and it was part of, very saliently part of the manifesto, that poverty alleviation will be prioritized and that social protection will be one of the mainstays of policy making during the tenure of the government. And therefore, I was tasked to prepare a poverty alleviation plan, and hence ESAS came into being. Now, ESAS is basically a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder program with more than 140 policies, programs, initiatives, all linked by theory of change. The aspiration is to use the entire engine of the government to lift people out of poverty and to provide them social protection universally. There are various ways of classifying the 140 initiatives within the bracket of ESAS. You can either classify them on the basis of the technical areas under which they fall. So there are 4 pillars under which these initiatives fall. There are programs which are social protection focused, and in that realm, they target 14 specific target groups. So there are programs for very poor, for 7 million poor women, for 4 million school-going children, for 250,000 undergrad students, for 250,000 families, to provide them specialized nutrition food, for poor farmers, for laborers, for disabled, for orphans, for homeless. So that's one category. Those are one set of programs under one pillar, which is the social protection pillar. Then there is a jobs and livelihoods pillar, where the aspiration is to provide livelihood opportunities to 3.8 million families in the country. And there are a specific set of programs under the poverty graduation initiatives under the jobs and livelihoods pillar. Then there is a human capital development pillar, and there are conditional cash transfer programs on health and nutrition and education bundled under that. And then there is the 4th pillar of ESAS, which is to address elite capture and to make the government pro-poor, and a range of different policy initiatives under that. So that's one way of describing ESAS under these 4 technical pillars. Now, in order to, once the program was conceptualized and its strategy was developed, we developed a set of time-bound outcome-based goals and aligned the different programs and got a conceptual clarity on how they would contribute to those time-bound outcome-based goals and targets. And then a whole infrastructure was created to execute this program. So a new ministry was created at the federal level because we didn't have a ministry for social protection. It's a devolved subject under in Pakistan's federal polity. So the federal government took ownership and leadership, created a new ministry. The largest budget in the history of the country was allocated for social protection. The cabinet approved a governance and integrity policy, which is now applicable to all the 34 executing agencies of this program. We created a governance observatory to see how we were making progress in terms of compliance with to that policy. A delivery unit was created to track the different initiatives. And then we made investments. So in 2019, we made investments to develop the digital backbone for the delivery. So a new biometric payment system was procured. Commercial banks were brought on board. We made investments to conduct a household digital survey. We created our capability for data analytics and the necessary data ecosystem that was required for big data analytics was developed. A cell phone-based assistance-seeking mechanism was developed. a mechanism was developed to create, to make our national socioeconomic registry live. A monitoring mechanism was developed, and so these were these different elements of the infrastructure or the backbone for this program. And then for the last 1 year, we've been conceptualizing, piloting, consolidating, and upscaling programs. So on a fast track basis, a number of different things have happened over the last 1 year. It's hugely ambitious program to deliver, and we're in the midst of rolling out some, in the midst of gathering evidence from some pilots. In other areas, we are upscaling programs, and as I said earlier, they target different target groups. I want to spend a little bit of time to describe to you what we did in COVID. Because when COVID hit, we in Pakistan were faced with a very dire situation, because 24 million of our breadwinners either work in the informal sector or they get daily wages or piece rate remuneration, and life for them basically came to a standstill. So over 160 million individuals in the country who were the dependents of these 24 million breadwinners, given family size, for them, they were in the tightest spot possible. So the government allocated $1.25 billion to reach out to 16.9 million families. Given household size, this means reaching out to over 110 million, which is nearly half the country's population. And to execute a cash transfer initiative, which is what we opted for. We didn't opt for an in-kind assistance program because of a number of different factors. Because the costs are high, the risk of pilferage is much higher, because our capabilities were not to do in kind. So we opted for cash transfer, also cognizant of the fact that the benefits to the economy accrue more significantly when you do cash transfers. And basically, the government approved $75 basic subsistence for half the families in the country. My ministry was given the task to execute this mandate, and we leveraged three capabilities to execute it. The SMS based request seeking mechanism. So we asked all citizens who wanted assistance to send their 16-digit unique national identity card number to us, and there was a massive campaign in the country. Every radio channel, the television, newspapers, where 2 weeks into the lockdown, sought requests for assistance. And as a result of that, we got 139 million SMS messages, of which 66 million were unique. Once we got those 66 million unique requests, we used data analytics with the number of wealth proxies and with the 16-digit number as the peg. And then we checked them against existing socioeconomic survey data as well, but we didn't rely on that exclusively. We checked them against immigration records, the Federal Bureau of Statistics, of revenue records, ownership of car, their history of international travel, the government employment status. And we came out with a cohort of 16.9 million, to which we then SMS'd in a phased-wise manner, asking them to go and collect payments at branchless banking retailers. It seems very simple, but it was not. And we were able to execute this because in 2019, we had made these digital investments in these digital capabilities. So we were quite, should I say, advantaged, in an advantageous position. We were able to join the dots between these different digital capabilities and run the cash transfer program. This was the largest and most ambitious program ever run in the country. And just to put things in perspective, we are the fifth most populous country in the world. So running thousands of centers and thousands of ATMs and thousands of branchless banking retailers, of telecom operators, and getting people to go there and verify their identities through real-time verification in real time through our a repository of identification, and then to give them payments was a very profound experience. This program was end-to-end digital, fully transparent, apolitical, and it inspired confidence of various political factions who were governing different subnational governments to subscribe to this program also. And over the course of several months, we dispersed cash to these families. And the human aspect of it was extremely touching at a time when people had no fallback, nothing to take back home to eat. Life for them had come to a standstill, and to get cash into the hand. If I have a minute, I would like to talk about the difficulties, but if I've run out of time,
Can we cover that in the second round, ma'am? Because it's been
absolutely.
an extremely informative response, because you've really led us through how you've put together this wonderful structure for delivering. And it's something that we would like to build upon, and also build upon your own experience on extending your universal healthcare and your background as one of the leading public health specialists in the world, ma'am. So I'll come back to you on the second round. And we are now going to move to our next panelist, Mr. Michael Cichon. Mr. Cichon is a mathematician, economist, and a public policy specialist with academic training. His 40-year career spans national government, international organizations, civil society, and academia. He was the director of ILO's Social Security Department from 2005 to 2012. And also from 2013 to 2018, he held a position as honorary professor of social protection at the Graduate School of Governance of Maastricht University in Netherlands. And he is a fellow of the International Council of Social Welfare and its immediate past president. So Mr. Cichon, my question to you is, you know the Asia Pacific region very well. You have been a peer reviewer for our report. And can you tell me from your experience, the numbers speak very loudly. Why are governments not listening? If the facts are all in front of you, why are governments not listening? And what is the reaction that you get when you present your research? How can we improve the way we conduct and communicate our advocacy on social protection? Be very interested to hear from you, sir.
Okay, good morning. First of all, I concur with Dr. Nishta's congratulations to the report. It could not have come at a better time, and its recommendations are right on. So that's the first thing. The second, to your question, why are governments not listening? Well, I think there's two reasons, or I see two reasons if I look back over the last decades, and even in particular the decade since the international financial crisis. The two reasons are, first of all, they're not listening because people are not shouting loud enough. That means societies are not actually demanding the right or the implementation of the right to social security or to social protection as they should. There's a lot of non-understanding out there about what social protection actually does, that it is not a charity, it is actually a right of every citizen and every resident. That's one reason, and we have to do more to overcome that. I go back to that in the second part of your question. And then the other reason why governments are not listening, sadly, is because some voices are simply too loud. And these are the voices that keep repeating that social protection for all, universal, is not affordable. We know from your research, from the research of ADB and ILO, that somewhere between 2% and 7 to 8% of GDP, every country in the region could fill the social protection gap. For most of that, that is within reach. So why have we been told by institutions that I don't name for decades, that means since 1918, between 1918 and 2015 in particular, that social protection cannot be afforded? And why have we not been told, and why have we not understood that without social protection, without the investment in people, without getting people out of the informal sector, without getting them out of ill health, without getting them out of informality, without getting them out of insecurity, a country can never unlock its full productive potential. You simply cannot grow if you don't provide social protection to everybody. And there's a good reason to believe it, because all the successful economies in the world to this date have been investing heavily in social protection, and not while they were rich. They did it while they were growing. So what can we do to change all this? I think there's three things. We have to be much better. And if I say we, I mean civil society, academia, the international institutions, and the pressure groups in the countries, and some of the government institutions. We have to be much better in simply selling what social protection means, that it is an investment in future growth, in future well-being. We have to tell that there's only good examples in by way of investing on, and the returns on investment in long-term investments in social protection. And we have to be able to communicate that there can be pragmatic national development plans that can be solidly financed. You cannot achieve everything in 5 months or a half a year, whatever, but you can do something over a period of time, and every country can do so. But then one thing is that we have to be honest about, and that's academia and some of the expert world. We have to come clean. And I think we often don't. We keep saying, well, yes, social protection is affordable, but we have to come clean with the fact that it is not for free. That means basically countries have to exploit their full fiscal space to afford social protection. Without collecting taxes, you cannot afford social protection. And the sad fact is that in the Asia region, the tax to GDP ratio is about 3.7% lower than the average in developing countries. If many countries in the region, I think we have to be clear and honest about this, are not making the tax effort, that's the term the IMF used, to actually collect what is due, without even raising tax rates at the moment, but just collect what is due, you could probably collect as much money to afford a basic universal social protection system nearly everywhere. So that's something that we have to come clean about, and that we have to be very strong in sending a message that yes, it's affordable, but yes, you have to do something about it. And then I think what academia can do, we have to be better, much better, in actually furnishing national debates on social protection with information and evidence, right? We have to go down and not just write papers, and that we then sort of try to get into internationally renowned journals. We have to get down and actually teach and inform national debates about what and how social protection steps and progress can be made in the different countries. That's my take on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sishaw, for your very frank views and being very succinct and clear about your recommendations. I now have the pleasure to turn to Ms. Sarah Cook. Ms. Cook is the Director of the Institute of Global Development and an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in the University of New South Wales. But before that, we all know her from the time that she was the Director of UNICEF's Office of Research in Florence in Italy, and also her 6-year term as Director in the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development in Geneva. Ms. Cook, drawing from your rich experience of working within the UN family, we can see that many countries in the region spend only 2 to 3% of their GDP on social protection. When the global average is around 11%, in OECD it's almost 20%. So what does this lack of investment mean for our region, for children, for persons with disabilities, for women? What are the opportunities we are missing? Thank you. So, Ms. Cook, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you it's a great pleasure to be part of this conversation. And let me also add my congratulations on an excellent report. And I really concur with previous speakers that it stands out for its clarity of analysis and messages, and also very timely, obviously. So first, on the question, let me break it down into 3 parts. To address the lack of investment, I think previous speakers and particularly Michael Cichon have already highlighted this and the affordability, the importance of clear messages about what it does afford, what it does cost, but that this is a possible investment. I think that said, obviously across the region, we see huge variations. There's variations in the size of countries, the level of GDP, the patterns of growth, as well as their patterns and levels of expenditures. And as much as always, much gets hidden in aggregates. And I think the region is particularly varied and particularly complex in its variation. We heard also from Fiji. So we actually do have countries which have very little coverage in terms of formal social protection systems. But even with their health and education expenditures, they're actually quite high in terms of their shares of GDP. But obviously, you know, the costs of reaching small, scattered, remote populations is quite high. So the outcomes for those costs may not be the same outcomes as in certain other parts of the region. So I think that variation also needs to be taken into consideration in terms of thinking about, you know, aggregate levels of investment. I think the report also points out correctly that the expenditures in aggregate are too low to be effective, so that some of the expenditures that are being invested are not necessarily having the impacts that we've heard are possible through social protection programs, the productivity enhancing impacts, as well as the protective and poverty reducing impacts. And so from that, obviously, we've seen the presentation of the simulations that show that with certain types of investments, those impacts can be more effective. I think what we need then is at the level of specific programs and the nature of benefits, more evidence at the level of outcomes and really how these investments are translating into the outcomes we want to see beyond just the recipient of actual benefits, and where different investments can make most difference, and therefore to understand the different contexts, you know, in different contexts, how the trade-offs play out and what the trajectory for moving towards a more comprehensive, more universal system, which we've agreed the report emphasizes is the objective. What kind of trajectory for expansion or pathway that could be between expanding the coverage overall, between increasing the benefits for the particular groups and programs that are there so that they're more adequate. These are all sort of processes and trade-offs which need national level analysis. And we've heard some good examples, I think, most recently from Pakistan, but others, which also take into consideration issues of the political economy, of the welfare system, of the state, and the issues around cohesion and social cohesion and community cohesion that these social protection systems can also contribute to, but also with very narrow targeting, etc., can also undermine. And so I think these local political economy factors are also important as we think about increasing expansion and the trajectories of expansion. I think the other issue that the report also points to is that for any given level of spending, there are opportunities for efficiency gains, or the efficiency of investments need to be considered. How the money is allocated, how it's spent, the use of technology, we've heard some good examples, and the design and implementation of programs all matter for how the resource, the investment translates into outcomes. And I think we've got a lot of evidence now that increasingly narrow targeting, strong conditionalities can have very high administrative costs, it can have high exclusion errors, and it can often therefore undermine some of the broader objectives and the sort of process of moving towards universalism. So I think in discussing the means for building more universal systems, we need to think both, as has been said, about the horizontal expansion and the vertical expansion, as the ILO and social protection floor discuss it. And I think what this report helpfully does is focus in that respect, both on the contributory and the non-contributory schemes. Often I think in social protection discussions, we talk primarily about the poverty alleviation, the targeted poverty reduction schemes, the cash transfers targeted at particular groups. But clearly, if we're going to move towards these universal systems, we really need to look at these interlinkages between and the synergies between formal and informal, between contributory and non-contributory schemes. And so to come to the second part of the question of what do the limited investments, levels of investment mean across this region, I think many of the issues have been highlighted. At a general level, the potential for improving the ability to respond to shocks is critical. It is obviously being seen particularly in the light of COVID, but also in the light of climate and environmental shocks, as well as the more idiosyncratic and individual shocks that households and individuals face. As the report discusses, there are some groups who are more marginalized or excluded in the current systems. And we've already heard a lot about informality. And I think this really, for the region, as others have emphasized, is one of the critical issues, this big so-called missing middle. They're often not the poorest, but they're often a critical part of the productive labor force. And losing them to active employment has huge impacts for their families and dependents, but also for the broader economy. And we know that a large share of in these countries of the population lives around the upper poverty limit, the 550 a day limit, or some middle income just level above poverty, but without much with few assets, with limited savings, with limited insurance, and so without social protection, at high risk of falling back into poverty in the event of shocks. And obviously this has broader economy-wide implications. I think the second group that again emphasized in the report, but always requiring really thoughtful consideration, is women, whether in the informal sector, whether outside the labor market, or even in formal systems. And across the region, there's strong gender norms and roles. There's forms of different varied forms of exclusion or discrimination against women and girls, including, access to education, through to the age of marriage, through to labor force participation, pensions, etc. And as we have seen, particularly, globally in COVID, this burden of family care, of health care, including the paid care sector, falls predominantly on women and exposes them to particular risks, which include violence and personal insecurities. And I think social protection can play a role in really countering, not just in immediate benefits to women, but also in countering forms of gender disadvantage. And I think here I'd like to, and I'll come back to this point later, but beyond cash transfers, we would also probably emphasize from this perspective the importance of the kind of social infrastructure, social investments, collective public goods and services that really are a critical part of reducing that gender division of labor, the gendered burden and care roles, in order to have better social protection systems, more holistic systems for women and I would say for children. I think the third group in terms of who, if with lower investments, are really more broadly the terms of those we consider vulnerable. And I think those are where we often see, and we've heard many examples of the targeted programs, including those people marginalized by reasons of race, caste, ethnicity, as well as gender or disability, age, etc. And I think this is where actually across the region, we have seen the biggest expansion of programs. For example, we've seen the social pensions that have expanded across many countries. There's also a lot of child benefits, again, varied, and they can always be better and more adequate. But many of the benefits across the region are targeted to children and the elderly. And we've seen this, at least I've been looking recently in the Pacific, and there's many programs emerging there. So those are the kind of areas where I think we've seen a lot of progress. And
Sarah, we'll cover this in the day. Can we move on with the questioning, and we'll come back to you in the second round, just because
Yep,
I want to give
okay.
enough time for the audience questions also.
Yep,
Thank you.
sure.
So, thank you very much, Sarah. I think you've kind of reflected very deeply on exactly what are the missing opportunities when we do not have comprehensive social protection, and what are the groups that are losing out. I would like to turn, last but not least, to His Excellency Mr. Kung Pok, who is the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, who is right now kind of leading the implementation of the ASCC blueprint and leading the ASCC department in the ASEAN Secretariat. He was previously the Undersecretary of State in the Office of Council of Ministers in the Royal Government of Cambodia, and he also co-founded the Cambodian Institute for Strategic Studies. Mr. Pok, ASEAN has championed the cause and adopted the ASEAN Declaration on Strengthening Social Protection. The ASEAN Sociocultural Blueprint places equitable emphasis on equitable access to social protection at the core. What has been the achievement within ASEAN in implementing this vision, and how do you monitor it? The floor is yours, Mr. Pok.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for your kind introductions, and I would like to congratulate UNESCOPS and also ILO, on the launch of this very important report. I'm sure the findings and recommendation will be useful for our member state, in formulating the national policies and so on. Please let me start by, saying a little bit, about the guiding principles that, as a regional body, it is some things that we are, trying to do. Of course, we look at, our social protection work, from the angles of inclusiveness, from the, which means all people, should be entitled to various support, from the member state, and also, the sustainability function of it, and that, not just look at how we are going to do it, but also, mobilizing sufficient resources so that we can ensure, successful implementation of the plan of actions and so on. And of course, how we can make our social protections, as adaptive as possible, by enabling our people, to be able to adapt to and cope with, all sort of shocks. And that would allow us, to build a more resilient society and so on. Of course, now with the negative impact of COVID-19, the road ahead will be a difficult one. And I have to admit that even, before the COVID-19, we are still, working hard to achieve some of the areas that we are not yet, to the point that we wish that we could actually. Of course, we have the commitments there. We have the, policies, instrument, and everything's there. But then, there's a lot of issues that are facing the member state, especially when it comes to the financial resources. I know that some of the panelists already talk about this, and we can have, a more productive conversation on how we can further finance, our social protections and so on. But what I would also like, to say is that, one of the lessons that we learned from the COVID-19 is that a crisis with its magnitudes also offers us a unique opportunity, to build a more resilient social protection systems, and not to recreate, the kinds of vulnerabilities that we are now facing. That exacerbate, the impacts of the previous disaster or the current disasters that we are in. So that is some things that we have to keep in mind. I don't want to make this as a, ASEAN 101, by listing all the key documents, but I have to say is that this document are very important because these are the document that guide the member state when it comes to formulating the national policies and so on. But one thing I also want to highlight is that although when we look at the plan of action and all the documents that I'm going to mention in a moment, that they are ambitious, but if we look at the national policies of each member state, you can see some member states are even going beyond the regional plans that we put out. So this is some things that I also want to highlight. Of course, for us, we are guided by the ASEAN declarations on strengthening social protections and its regional framework and action plan. And it's not just, providing the kinds of principles or strategies, but also mechanisms on how we can make sure, equitable access is there. Of course, we also have, the mechanisms that is supporting the implementation of this declarations, action plans and framework, as well as we have the ASEAN ministerial meeting on social welfare developments, and also senior official meeting on social welfare development. Next, I would like to give some of the key documents for colleagues informations here. We are now in a very critical year. 2020 is the year that we are concluding all of our work plan, and also the time for us to work on the next one. So of course, all the gaps that we identify during our implementations of the previous work plan, it is some things that we will, consider when it comes to crafting, a new work plan. Of course, we acknowledge, there are things that we've been doing a good job, but there are also things that we need to further improve as well. And now with the COVID-19, it, even exposes us, especially the areas that we are still, struggling to improve. So that is some things, very, very, very useful in terms of, having the platform today, listening to all colleagues, and receiving some of the good suggestions so that we can, incorporate some of these recommendations in our next work plan. On inclusion and empowerment of persons with disabilities, that we have the ASEAN Enabling Master Plan 2025, mainstreaming the rights of persons with disabilities, as well as development of its monitoring and evaluation framework. And on the children issues, we also have the ASEAN, declarations on the rights of children from all forms of online exploitation and abuse. We are also, concluding, and hopefully we are going to adopt in the November summit the regional action plan to implement the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Aging, empowering older persons in ASEAN. And when it comes to building resiliencies, especially in time of shock, and not just a pandemic but also natural disaster as well. And we just adopted the ASEAN guideline on disaster responsive social protection program to increase resilience, which is jointly developed by the disaster management agencies and the social welfare sectoral body. So these are some of the key documents that guide us in terms of how we are going to support our member state in further advance the social protections in the regions. Of course, having the policy is one thing, but translating all of these regional policies into national priorities or concrete action is another thing. But, I have to say one thing is that all of our member states are very committed to this. They've been trying hard. Of course, there are areas that they need to do more, but in general, I have to say is that we've been on a good track. But I have to say, and this is some things that all the member states acknowledge, there's more for us to do, because when we are talking about providing social protection to everyone in ASEAN, it's a huge task, and it is some things that we have to have a comprehensive plan. Of course, having the policy is one thing. We are also looking at how we can, build the capacities or promote investment, on social work. So there are two key documents on this as well. The first one is the Hanoi Declaration on strengthening social work toward cohesive and responsive ASEAN communities, and it will be followed by a development of the roadmap. And I hope, we can work with our partner, to develop this roadmap. So with this, roadmap, we hope that we can mobilize more resources and also, make the member state commit, to invest more on the strengthenings and also, providing support for our social worker and so on. Last year, we also established the ASEAN Training Center for Social Work and Social Welfare. And then, this center, aims to develop curriculum, provide, training for our social works and so on. These are very important, especially, we are now in the midst of COVID-19, and many of the people who are, negatively exposed to the pandemic, those who work at the front line, and many of them are social workers. I think this is some things that we need to do more to support them. On the issues of monitoring, I would like to briefly discuss about this. Again, 2020 is an important year. We are now working on, the midterm review of our blueprint. And, according to the preliminary result, we can see there's some positive development in some area, but there are also areas that we need to work more as well. So I hope, when the findings available, for the submission to the summit in November, and after that we will, look at it and how can we, further improve the areas that we are still lagging behind. And also, a plan, baseline study on social protections in ASEAN next year. And I hope that, this state of social protection in ASEAN study will allow us to kind of, have a clearer picture of how much we have achieved and what are the areas that we can do more. I'm running out of my time, Mr. Srivanas.
No, I think we'll come back to the rest of the points maybe in the second round, Mr. Pope.
Okay,
That's
okay.
because you've really laid the ground wonderfully in terms of the framework. So if you can hold and frame your thoughts, we'll come back to the rest of it during the second round.
No
I think
problem.
you've really given us a real flavor of ASEAN's comprehensive approach to social protection. So we will come back to it perhaps during the second round, ma'am. So,
no problem. Thank you.
we now are going to move into round two, and I apologize for really hurrying our presenters who are really presenting such a comprehensive and wonderful picture that is required to educate us and to show us the way forward. But I want to give enough time for the audience also to ask questions to the panel. So in terms of the second round, I would perhaps request for succinct responses within 2 to 3 minutes so that we have time to open up the floor for our audience. So we all know that you've kind of laid the foundation with your first round of responses, but yet we know that there are big emerging challenges ahead. We have population aging, migration, and yet there are opportunities in terms of technological improvements, digital technology, and other challenges such as urbanization and climate change. So within that, I would like to go back to the second round and ask Ms. Woniwaka very briefly, can you reflect in 2 to 3 minutes? How do you think? I know that you have a very comprehensive vision of how you're going to implement social protection, but how badly has COVID-19 affected your plans? And how are you going to prioritize? What are your priorities for social protection moving forward in the short and medium term?
Thank you, Dr. Srinivas. COVID-19 has had an unprecedented impact on the lives of Fijian people. And when we think about that in the context of the loss of employment, over 115,000 Fijians lost their jobs. That's about a third of the Fijian workforce due to COVID alone. Percentage-wise, if we're to look at total labor participation, it's 37.4% females. It's 57% of the Fijian population in the labor workforce, 37.4% of which are females, and 76.4% of that labor workforce are males. We heard from Ms. Sarah Cook about the disproportionate impact on women, the COVID impact on women. And that is an area that we see a huge priority to be in formulating a social protection mechanism that is cognizant of the disproportionate impact of COVID on certain groups. And particularly, we talked about women, the missing middle, amongst others. So what has COVID taught us? Due to the restrictions on mobility during the COVID pandemic, what it has brought to the fore for us as a national social protection mechanism is the need to ensure that the platform for delivery is relevant to the environment that COVID has created. So what does it mean? When we take, again, the context of Fiji and the geographical inaccessibility of social protection, the use of ICT platform becomes very crucial. And also in the COVID context with the mobility issues, ICT platform becomes very crucial. So that is something that we are prioritizing at the moment for reform. Apart from that, the demography. Fiji's population in our last census is in 2017, 70% of our population is under the age of 40. Now, if we take the next 20 to 30 years, we will be looking at an aging population. So gearing for that, being able to be ready for that aging population is critical for us. Again, in the need to integrate a non-contributory scheme with the contributory scheme that we already have, making the contributory scheme a stepping stone, if I just put it in a phrase maybe, from welfare to workfare, to ensure that social protection is not the end of a story for our beneficiaries, but only a stepping stone to joining the workforce. I think is very critical. So yes, Dr. Tata, in a nutshell, that is what I would see to be a priority for us going forward. Thank you.
That was a wonderfully analytical answer where you've really laid out clearly the priorities and the challenges. Ibu Hayani, I'm going to move to you now. We just heard about the plans in Fiji. Could you share with us similarly, what are the top 3 challenges do you think Indonesia faces and how will your government address them? And if you could be succinct so that about 2 to 3 minutes to address this question.
Thank you, moderator. The main challenge faced in Indonesia social protections that there are still gaps in the implementation of social protection in Indonesia. To eliminate gaps in the social protections, Indonesian government now is working to reform the social protection systems amid outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are discussing within the related government and also the international organization. The purpose is to create a social protection system which is much stronger and more comprehensive in order it could be to respond quickly and precisely when a crisis occurs. So I think in the top challenges for the future of social protection in Indonesia is also climate change and also the changing the form of works. So several things that need to be considered when reforming the social protection system include the targets, the target itself. For example, workers with a certain income limit, which is affected by climate change. And also the young people, women, whether informal or informal sectors. People with disability, micro and small entrepreneurs. And the form of social protection should customs by needs of the targets. In order to deal with the changing of works, it is necessary to prepare a training center program in accordance with the development of the industrial revolutions, so as to improve the quality of human resources. It is also in Indonesia expand social security for informal sectors, especially to have a new regulation on that. So I can say for this that the increasing benefit for a specific group, it is also important, especially for non-income earners. So this is because of like a climate change or changing the forms of work. I think now Indonesia also working for thinking about the reformation of social security, which is included in social protection itself. I think this is, I respond to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Hayani, for laying out your priorities very clearly. Dr. Nishtar, you are uniquely placed with your background, both dealing with the largest social protection program in Pakistan, along with your extensive knowledge of the health systems, which allows us to reach out to you to ask you, how do you think health systems need to evolve to meet the changing needs of the population? And why is it that many countries find it difficult to provide universal health care? And what do they need to pay attention to? So please feel free to also complete whatever you had to say. But noting the limited time, I also wanted to ask you the question on health systems, since you are the best place to answer that. Thank you so much. Your floor is yours, Dr. Nishtar.
So thank you for that question. I think in terms of health systems, there are post-COVID, there are two things that we need to focus on. One is, of course, the public health side. And on the public health side, post-COVID, we have to ask ourselves, where do countries stand in terms of implementation of the international health regulation? I mean, during the COVID crisis, there were serious weaknesses exposed with regard to surveillance at country entry points and the regulation of the laboratory system and the testing capacity, and the health information systems were a major stumbling block. Many countries did not even have the basic bare bones and had to recreate the infectious disease surveillance systems. So basically, there are the building blocks of the international health regulations, which, by the way, are legally binding on countries. And I think one aspect of the health system is to turn back to see whether that framework requires to be revisited and what the status of compliance is. I recall back in 2017 when I was one of the three, campaigning as one of the three shortlisted candidates for DG WHO, whenever we would raise this point about compliance with IHR with governments, the expectation was that this is WHO's job, but there are many binding actions on part of governments. And my consistent takeaway from that time was that governments did not take that risk seriously enough. So one aspect of what we need to do in the health systems realm is to fix that side. On the more classic health system, on the side of the more classic health system, where you talk about universal health coverage, there are three aspects to that. In order to deliver universal health coverage, can countries ensure geographic access to healthcare? Can countries ensure financial access to healthcare? And if they can provide both, what about quality? I mean, in terms of geographic access, there are many countries in sub-Saharan Africa where there aren't even secondary level healthcare facilities. So, the rich and affluent will board flights and go to the Far East, will go to other countries where medical tourism has actually evolved as an industry. But back in their own countries, if you have cancer or require dialysis, or if a child requires a correction of a congenital heart disease, you're basically doomed to death, because across many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, they just are not you don't have geographic access. That's one issue. And of course, we can talk about the constraints, geographic constraints to primary health care and as well. But assuming that in some countries, geographic access is not a problem, and the healthcare facilities are there, partly provided by the private sector in mixed health systems in countries such as, for example, mine, then financial access becomes a problem. Because in many mixed systems, out-of-pocket payment is a major means of health financing. There's a huge health market. So how do governments step in and provide universal health coverage from a financing lens? There are different instruments. Insurance is one. The fund-based system to augment insurance is another. The free at the point of service delivery is another. And the models that countries espouse have to be very unique to their own political systems. There are some countries that follow the beverage model. The Commonwealth countries follow the beverage model. Many countries follow the Bismarck model. There are many that are hybrid, and there are many countries who have rudiments of both, but with a large private sector operating and out-of-pocket payments prevailing as a major means of health financing. So, depending on the context you are in, you have to have different starting points. You can either start with geographic access, or you can start with financial access, and in well-developed systems, then you have health systems, and you have other considerations: quality, cost of care, ethical considerations, the cost of operations, the comparative cost of different reform models. So every country has, the reason why there has been little written about health system reform is because you cannot have a cookie cutter approach. It is so deeply embedded in the body politic of a country. What you can have are values and principles and broad directions. But beyond of that, countries have to take very unique decisions based on their own circumstances. And I hope that this interest in health systems that COVID has sparked will not die away when the vaccine is available and we get back to business as usual. We hope that this is going to have a lasting impact. Because many countries had to scramble and come up with solutions. And as they were confronted with the crisis. So let's hope that this is going to be one of the silver lining behind this dark cloud when we emerge from the depths of this issue.
Do you see the political commitment in governments, ma'am? Just briefly, do you see that in your own government too?
Well, as you can see that, on the social protection side, there is huge commitment, as I just explained in my, in response to my previous question. So social protection, poverty alleviation is top of the charts. As far as the health sector is concerned, during the COVID crisis, yes, our country did very well, and the numbers speak for themselves. So I don't have to make a political speech here. I think the numbers speak for themselves. We're one of the few countries who've managed both the economic livelihood aspect for the poor quite well, and then on the health side, the targeted lockdowns and the way we leverage the infectious disease surveillance infrastructure has really come in handy. Going forward, there appears to be a commitment to take on health reform very seriously, but these are not things that you can turn around in a matter of 1 or 2 years. In 2010, I wrote a book called Choke Bites, and one of the things I emphasized in it as a prerequisite for successful health reform was that it should be insulated from the policy vacillations which are inherent to the changes in government. Because classically in every country, one country government comes and does one thing, and the other government comes in and undoes it. So we hope that some of the seeds that we are sowing of transparency promoting reform in the health sector is going to have a lasting impact.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think your insights are very valuable, both in terms of providing technical advice on health system reform and the importance of managing the political economy. Mr. Sishon, I'm going to come to you with your 2 to 3 pieces of advice. What are the 2 to 3 pieces of advice that you would give to governments in the post-COVID world about how to improve, how to enhance social protection, learning from the COVID-19 crisis?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll try to stick to my 2 minutes. So first of all, what we've learned here, one of the most important things that we've learned is the essence of speed. We know within 4 weeks, 6 weeks after the onset of the crisis, we knew that we would lose about 50 to 60 million people to poverty in Asia, and about the equivalent of 200 to 300 million jobs. So what is important, and what this crisis showed again, that countries that have existing systems can speed them up, can react much faster than those who have to build up ad hoc measures. It just takes much more time. And following from that, the advice, for whatever it's worth, in an ideal world, what I would say is there's one piece that says, introduce your social protection systems or complete them to an effective social protection floor as quickly as you can during the crisis or after the crisis. And in particular, assure universal access to healthcare by public financing and public delivery. I don't think there's good evidence that the private sector and huge out-of-pocket payment systems often associated with huge out-of-pocket payment systems can do as good a job as a publicly financed system can do. I think we have to come clean with that too. Then on social protection transfers, universal pensions are an easy target. They're easy to implement. Child grants similarly. And employment guarantee schemes, as in India, which wasn't discussed before, but that's an important issue on unemployment benefits. Unemployment insurance can be introduced immediately or almost immediately by grandfathering in the present unemployment and just borrowing the money against future contributions. That can be done for the formal sector. The second piece of advice I have is a little more complicated. The action plan that I see ASEAN developing on social protection is a very good start, but what it actually should lead to in the long run, and I think about 100 years of ILO experience of that will probably speak for that, it has to be turned, or it should be turned, in an ideal world into a binding convention on social protection and minimum levels of social protection, as we have in the European Code on Social Protection. It levels the playing field of competition in between the countries, and it actually protects people. And most important, if you have a binding instrument that can be ratified by a country, national project groups, national voices can refer to it, and it can actually they can use it as an instrument in a national policy debate. It actually serves as a catalyst for development of social protection. And thirdly, and my last point, is the financing. It comes in two. A is get the tax system in order and actually basically collect the 40% of the taxes that are due but are not collected at the moment. And if you don't do that, all else will failing. I've said that before, but it's almost a ceterum censeo. Then the second sort of corollary to that is, and that's what the global civil society at the moment demands from governments around the world, and it probably can start in Asia perhaps a little earlier, is we need a global fund for social protection to support those people and those countries that actually, even if they make the most tax effort, cannot afford within the next 10 years or so to even have basic levels of social protection. I leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sisham. Ms. Cook, simply coming to you with a simple question: how can we, the UN family, academia, and the research community, best assist policymakers in extending and improving the social protection systems in terms of the storm ahead of us?
Thank you. Yeah, well, building on what's been said, obviously governments are having to respond at speed and quickly. And I think the role of researchers and academics and also other institutions, really is to help both analyze the past, think about the data that we need to support some of those decisions, and think about some of the forward-looking future questions. And I'd say on that, maybe 5 quick points. One issue is thinking more and analyzing the interlinkages. That we've already laid out quite a complex system. There are quick things or simple things that we do in the program level, but we also recognize that social protection, social assistance, and labor market policies, the environment and the social side, all of these interlinkages also need to be thought about at a government and a systems level. So I think this is a role where the researchers can play a bigger role. I think in that, this link between cash and social infrastructure, the collective investments, the care systems, the issues around nutrition for children, these are not all addressed through cash. And we need to think really hard about those relationships between social investments, infrastructure, and the kind of cash programs that we can roll out quite quickly in particularly in emergencies, and scale up quickly. So they have their place, but they're not everything. I think the region, we've seen there's so much diversity and so many different levels. And this is a bit different from across sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America, where there's a little bit more commonality of some of the processes and systems and programs. And here we've got so much diversity, but it does lead to opportunities for learning. And I think the researchers, the regional bodies can play a role in facilitating some of those links between the academics who can research these comparative and different programs and the kind of lessons that we can draw out for policymakers and helping share information about them. I think the research role is important and has been mentioned in terms of monitoring and evaluation, but more broadly, evaluating pilots, testing things, looking at the outcomes, not just the immediate implementation success, but also, do different forms of programming lead to broader sets of outcomes. We've looked, for example, again, talking to the Africa context, where we, through a big program linking policymakers, researchers, the UN, UNICEF, have looked at things like whether different kinds of cash transfers have impacts on reducing age of child marriage, keeping girls in school, reducing child labor, reducing risky behavior. So these broader sets of outcomes that we can achieve through this. And finally, I'd say reducing data gaps. We still see, and particularly looking across the Pacific, there's a lot of missing data about, what is actually happening now and what we know. I just add again, I think the regional global institutions in particular have this obligation that Michael has just referred to try and think about how do we create a regional global social fund or mechanism to support countries, because with the shifting nature of shocks from more idiosyncratic, localized to very much covariant, countries will not have the capacity to always be able to scale up and respond adequately without broader regional or local support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That leads us to the last but not least, Mr. Perk, very simply, for ASEAN, what do you think are the next steps? You have all these frameworks, but what do you think are the 2 or 3, very quickly, within 2 minutes, what do you think are the key steps that will really accelerate action on social protection in ASEAN, if you were asked to list 3 priorities?
Thank you. Of course, with the COVID-19, it has severe negative impacts on our work. It's a major setback on our efforts to advance, the SDGs and our blueprint and so on. Of course, I should also mention that we are now working on, ASEAN Recovery Comprehensive Framework, and 2 priorities among the 5 priorities are closely related with the social protections as well, which is, looking at the human security and human capital. And of course, next year under Brunei chair, social protection will still be at the top of the agenda. And that is some things that we'll like, to highlight. Of course, at least there are 4 things that I'm hoping, in the coming year we can do more. It doesn't mean that these are the only 4 things we are doing, but at least, it is some things that we hope that we can intensify our efforts. The first one, we hope, to continue to work with the member state to translate all of this regional commitments priority into national strategies and concrete action. This is very important. Now we have the commitment, we have the consensus and everything. The next step for us is to make sure all of this recommendation will be translated into actual actions on the ground. The second area is, to further work with the member state to mobilize resources. I know it's a difficult one, and I hope that, probably we can have, more conversations on how we can finance social protection. And welcome comments and input from colleagues from various sectors, including our colleague from the academic institutions as well. The third area, very important as well, and also the area that I think that we still have a lot of room to improve, which is to put in place a robust and strong monitoring and evaluation framework so that we know where we are heading. Whether they require corrective actions and so on. I have to say, there will be a lot of work, for us to do in this area. And I'm glad that UNESCAP is, keen, to work with us on this, at least, in the areas of enabling master plan, the person with disabilities and so on. The fourth one, perhaps the most important one and the difficult ones as well. We have 10 countries. So we need to coordinate all of the activities and priorities and so on. So we hope that, in the coming year, we, can work closely with the member state, to overcome these challenges and further strengthen, our coordination, our cooperation, so that we can, really deliver what we are supposed to do. So at least these are the 4 areas that I think, we will continue to work in the coming months and years. Of course, there are also a lot of areas that we are going to do as well. And cooperation with ESCAP, ILO, and all colleagues here would be, extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. DSG, because ESCAP looks forward to supporting you in all these areas, and we are sure we'll have strengthened cooperation in the future. I am informed that a couple of our very distinguished panelists have other engagements, so we would like to thank all the panelists, but please, those who can stay on, it'd be great if you can, in case there are any questions. We have received a few questions on the floor already, but we would like to thank the minister from Fiji who has had to leave, and also the federal minister from Pakistan for really enriching this conversation. And thank you very much, both of you, Your Excellencies, for really contributing experience, and we have really benefited greatly from your contribution. Now we have reached the stage when, unfortunately, better late than never, but still we have the opportunity to reach out to the audience and take questions. And we have already received online a couple of questions from which we have consolidated, but we are just checking if there are a few hands up that they want to ask questions. But pending the compilation, I have a question a couple of questions for the panel. And these are interesting ones. One issue that keeps coming up in questions is what is the role, the new concept that a lot of people are talking about in terms of a universal basic income. I know this is an area that there is not much agreement on, or there is a lot of discussion around, and we have received a number of questions about the role of a universal basic income. And I'd like to reach out to some of our panelists as to what are can this be a solution, or is it, but I think the importance of comprehensive social protection against the new concept that's being raised. So anyone in the panel that would like to answer the question, maybe I can reach out to Michael C. Shaw to see if he has any 1 minute answer to this very quickly.
Yeah, I feared so, because I've been dodging the issue for a while. But first of all, if we are having universal pension, let me just make a case. If you have universal child benefit, if you have a universal pension, you already have more than half of a universal basic income. That's my first thing. The second thing is work is more than income. I mean, basically people need to contribute to society to feel to be useful. So to give them income in any case may not really solve all your social protection and all your social policy problems. Certainly, very, very down to earth. If you want to give everybody a universal basic income, it has to be at least at the level of the national poverty lines. Basically, that means you have to talk about 20% of GDP, 20% of the GDP per capita. And if you give that to everybody, that's about the price, the maximum price that you pay for a universal basic income. That means you crowd out all your other social protection expenditure for specific groups, for people in invalidity and sickness, in health problems, whatever. So I don't see the financiability of that at the moment. But I think having universal pensions, just to sum this up, having universal pensions, universal child grants, and something like an employment guarantee goes a long way towards it, and it's more financeable and more feasible at the moment. That's my point on it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sishong. Would any of the other panelists, Ibu Hayani or Sarah Cook or even Mr. Pok, would you like to respond? Please raise your hand if you'd like to, so that I can come to you. If you'd have any comments on this whole concept of universal basic income, if you have anything to add to what Mr. Sishong said. Ibu Hayani, can I come to you if you about your views on this?
Yes, thank you very much. I think what Mr. Sishong told about the basic income, that I believe that this is not very difficult, not really easy. I mean that it is also depend on the capacity of finance, the financial, especially maybe for government. So the universal basic income is shooting about every other side, because this is not easy to give a support for all people, especially for universal basic income. So like in Indonesia now, we think about how to help people, especially for workers, by doing something that helping workers in terms of, for example, in the pandemic COVID-19. So there is also wage subsidized, but this is not for all universal, but we do data from the membership of BPJS Ketenagakerjaan. So I think this is my short comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Hayani. Sarah, do you have something to say on this? I know it's a very topical.
Yeah, generally, I would, very much agree with Michael Sishong's sort of pragmatic approach. I think the debate is out there and is worth having. There are such big changes in the labor market, the digitalization, the gig economy, all of these changes that make work very precarious in different parts of the world. So I think, there are different conditions in different places. There are experiments going on. I think we really need to have the sort of data that try and answer some of the questions that are raised about it. But I think, yes, it's not a quick solution to anything. I think the sort of financing is a critical issue, and the conditions in different parts of the world, different countries, may also lead to very different outcomes for the program. But I think it's an interesting debate to keep sort of following and collecting data to really see where it can be useful and how it would work in practice if we go ahead.
I think that's a very comprehensive set of responses, and I think it's clear where our panelists stand on this. Several questions that we have received from our YouTube channel and otherwise from the chat is the issue of, we have highlighted that informality is one of the biggest challenges of expanding social protection in our region. So the question is, could the panel, any of the experts, highlight any successful examples of how contributory schemes have been extended to the informal sector? I think Indonesia gave some very good examples already, so they could also supplement, but are there any other good examples? So I would really reach out to all the four of our other panelists if they have examples that they could provide regarding extension of contributory schemes to the informal sector. Maybe I'll start in the same ratio. Mr. Pork, do you have anything to say? Or while you're thinking, maybe I'll go to Michael Fichon, then I'll come back to ASEAN on this. Michael, what do you have to say on that? You have to unmute yourself, I think. Mr. Fichon?
Okay, I wish I could be more positive. The best examples for extending social insurance towards the informal sector probably come from Latin America, not necessarily Asia as I see it at the moment. For me, the universal approach, basically tax finance benefits as a basic layer of protection are indispensable, and I don't see any easy way to extend the social insurance schemes to the informal sector.
Sarah, yeah, I understand. I think that's a very clear response. And Sarah, do you have any knowledge of schemes?
Well, obviously there's been a lot of work across India in particular, but globally through WeGo, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing, trying to expand some kind of coverage. So obviously it's not the same as integration. I think this issue of integration into the formal schemes is still a barrier, but these are mechanisms for trying to develop some kind of broad coverage for informal, largely women workers in home working, in waste picking, in different kinds of sectors. I think that these examples need to be looked at to see how far we can provide some kind of coverage, how far organizing. I mean, this SEWA obviously is the example in India, which is set up as a union covering these groups of workers. Different schemes can obviously be quite locally specific.
We've lost you, Sarah. Yeah.
Sorry. Are the lessons to learn from them? How can we have more flexible systems that could link informal to formal systems? I think there were experiments when we were looking at social protection earlier in the post-financial, post-97 crisis and early 2000s. I think experiments about more flexible payment mechanisms, into schemes were sort of being experimented with in different places. I can't recall all the details. I think it's an area where there may not be an easy solution, as Michael is saying, but I feel like we need to look into some of the options for more flexible payment for systems that can be partly contributory. China has obviously broadened out in terms of a social protection scheme to cover these workers, and I think that's the other way to incorporate the non-contributory schemes, but with some contributions where there's capacity, maybe on a more flexible basis. So I guess I'm saying no easy solution, but I think we need to have some more testing of options.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Mr. Pok, are there any experiences from the ASEAN region before I move last to Ibu Hayani, please?
The regional framework, we don't have that yet. But of course, the idea has gained traction. You know, during the ministerial meetings on social welfare, the minister also talked about this and even put it in the joint statement. And in some of our, latest analysis, about our development trajectory, we also, raised about this as well. So I'm afraid, at the regional order level, we don't have that kind of, regional framework to address this. But, the idea has been around, and also, colleague from the labor sector are also working on, improving the statistic so that we know more about, the condition in the informal economies and so on. But in the absence of a regional framework to address this, I have to say, member states have been introducing, various schemes. It depends on the context of the country and also the availability of financial resources for the country to do it. So, without the regional framework to address this, it does not necessarily suggest that, no progress on the ground. And you can, know a bit about the situation in Indonesia from our Indonesian colleague also. So I have to say, at the national level, there have been a number of initiatives to address this problem, but at the regional level, we don't have that yet. But maybe, now that the idea has been around and there's a lot of discussion among the ministers and so on, it could be, possible, to see a more comprehensive response to this in the coming years. So that's all I can offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it's for the very frank reflection. Ibu Hayani, we're running out of time, but you are someone who's actually trying to do something about this. So just a last few words from you in terms of whether this is something that's proving to be quite a challenge. Ibu Hayani?
I lost your.
I was just asking you. You really gave us a lot of details of how you were extending contributory schemes to the informal sector. Just wanted to say that, do you see a lot of challenges? Very briefly, if you could tell us that, do you see that working or do you see a lot of challenges?
I think, I think we will have a lot of challenges. I think, yes, of course, but we try to maintain and to maintain and strengthening our dialogue on our social partner, especially because in Indonesia we have also the union who take care on informal sector. I think this is the best thing, how to maintain the social dialogue on that. And the second challenge is it's not easy to get awareness of the workers in informal economy, but we do when we will have we will try to ask the community. I mean that to give raising awareness to the workers. So I think there is also the important how the government, how the state to think about this, whether there is another initiative to add something for the contribution and something like that. I think this is still a big challenge for us, but we believe that it will run effectively if we all together to think about that. I mean that for the related ministries, for all social partners, I think like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ibu Hayani. That we have gone over our time of this wonderful panel discussion, which has been very informative. And I think we have covered a very wide range of issues. We have dealt with 3 or 4, consolidated questions from the floor. And our panelists have covered a massive range, which will allow us to give a grasp of the challenges and opportunities for social protection. Before closing, moving to the closing remarks to be delivered by Ibu Armida Alisjabana, we would like you to take a little time, a minute, to fill in the evaluation form, the link to which you will see in the chat box right now. And we will just wait 20 seconds for you to fill out the evaluation form. Please please tell us how we have done despite the challenges the technologies posed. I mean, we know that we had to start slightly late, but I think we have dealt with the challenges very well. And I think many of us have really enjoyed this discussion. So let me now invite Ms. Armida Salcea Alice-Chavana, Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to say a few words to close the meeting today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Srinivas. And most importantly, I would like to extend our sincerest thanks and appreciation to all speakers, all eminent speakers, for a very, very rich presentation, as well as the ensuing discussion. Yeah, I think I'm sure all the viewers have benefited a lot from the discussion. Yeah. And it's almost impossible for me, although I've taken note, but almost impossible for me to really come up with a succinct, maybe a succinct summary coming out from this very rich discussion. But however, I'll try my best to just come up with a few highlights without any particular order or giving a certain focus of importance on the few highlights that I would like to convey as the closing remarks here. Again, DG ILO started by saying, I think, a very, very inspiring, what he said at the start, that COVID, as well as several of the speakers, that we have to see this COVID-19 as a unique opportunity for us, and I'm sure not only for Asia Pacific, but for everybody, a unique opportunity to build a more resilient society, including the social protection system. And we heard from the eminent speakers of the many ongoing initiatives, pre-COVID as well as during this crisis. Some actually is quite successful. Many, if I may say, best practice lessons learned that countries in the region, especially in our region, have taken up in building or strengthening their social protection system. So that is why I'm also referring to the DG in his opening remarks that this region has the good track record from the previous time, including previous crisis, of being able to lead out of the crisis, and including taking some of the transformative initiative. So that's why we hope one of that is in the sphere of the strengthening the social protection system. Regional framework, regional roadmap is not yet there, but I think all of us is working towards that. I think it would be good if we have some regional framework roadmap which will guide member states further in developing and strengthening their social protection system. And then we also hear a lot that social protection is an investment. That's clear. It's not a cost. It's an investment. Will support economic development, building the resilience, and the resilience, especially as a shield against crises such as now, this COVID pandemic, or other crises, the climate change shock, and the idiosyncratic shock. That's very clear. But it is not for free. Several speakers said this is not for free. For sure, somebody has to pay. But that's investment, understood. And in terms of the ballpark, I think depends on the country and so on and so forth. But average, we are talking about 7-8. I don't know if, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that about 7-8% of GDP average, yeah, for our region. Of course, global average is higher, but that just can be like a starting point, yeah, because we need to have some numbers if if we want to develop this further, understanding that this is an investment. So for that, yeah, for that, then of course in the development, the framework, and so on and so forth, that very important, yeah, that this has to be developed hand in hand with the financing mechanism or scheme, yeah. That's why one of the speakers talked also about the importance of this fiscal space, yeah, and it has to be in a comprehensive manner. Likewise, in the scheme itself, yeah, the combination or the interlinkages, one of the speakers mentioned this, the interlinkages between the so-called contributory scheme and the non-contributory scheme, yeah, has to be developed in an integrated manner within these schemes. Then I come to my last few remarks here, that our homework, yeah, our homework is also very clear that the need to expand horizontally and vertically the social protection system. When we say, okay, strengthening the social protection system, what do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean? It means that we need to expand, strengthen horizontally as well as vertically, and with a particular attention to leave no one behind. Yeah. So the leave no one behind, if I may just quote, yeah, one of the speakers said, for example, the vulnerable groups, including the missing middle and the marginalized segment of our population. So it needs to pay particular attention on that regard. So in this case, the data, yeah, the data statistics become very, very crucial. And in expanding, strengthening social protection system, one speaker again mentioned is very important, the benefit of utilizing technology. Yeah, technology, yeah, very clear. This ICT technology platform will facilitate the transformation or our effort to expand this initiative further. So this basically, yeah, if I may, in a summary, in a nutshell, a few of the key takeaways that I managed to take note. I'm sure many more, including the details there. But again, let's move forward from this event, to take our commitment, initiative, and work on strengthening the social protection system, including at country level in our region. And again, looking forward to join forces with all of you on this endeavor. Thank you very much. Over to you. Back to you, Srinivas.
Thank you very much, Ibu Armida, and my heartfelt thanks on behalf of me and my team to all the distinguished speakers and participants for making this event such a wonderful success. Stay well, and we hope to see you all in the next and final event of our regional conversation series on Building Back Better, to be held on 26th October 2020. So please watch the space. We'll be reaching out to you. That will be the culmination. Thank you, everyone. With that, we have come to the end of this regional conversation.
Thank you.